This meeting will also be conducted by audio and video conference without a physically present quorum of the Rock Island City Council due to the disaster declaration issued by Governor Pritzker. Because of this order related to COVID-19 health concerns affecting the state and the city, the mayor has determined that an in-person meeting at City Hall with all participants may not be practical or prudent. Alderpersons and staff may not all be physically present at City Hall due to the disaster, and physical attendance at City Hall may be limited. To participate remotely during the public comment or public hearing portion of the meeting, please join by phone at 1-208-820-4761, PIN 588-606-058 pound.
Thank you very much. Roll call.
Alderperson Robinson. Hurt. Gilbert. Present. Swanson. Here. Parker.
Here.
Poulos.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Mayor Tomes.
Here. Thank you. Public comment. Study session, not used to the public comment and study session. I haven't, okay, let's see if you say. Tip, you said, that's fine. We asked for public comment, so that's fine. Come on forth.
My name is Vincent Thomas, live at 1021st Street, and I've come to ask you if you've received information about the Blackhawk signage at I'm trying to catch my breath after climbing up all those stairs.
I apologize.
And if you received the information from the Native American Coalition and the attachments, which sort of explain why the signage is not appropriate to give to another city or another organization, and which just continues giving people the wrong message about Native American imagery. The National Congress of the Native Americans has taken a position, the Civil Rights Commission has taken a position, there have been resolutions locally all pointing out that it is not appropriate. And so it wouldn't be right by the city of Rock Island to pass it on to somebody else. And so I guess I'm just asking as to what is the intention of the city council members regarding the requests by the Native American Coalition not to...
I'm sorry, Mayor Tomes, this is David Morrison. I just, public comment, generally speaking, is comment period and not question and answer, but I guess you can proceed however you would care to, but I just wanted to interject that.
Oh, is this the attorney talking?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's good.
All right, David. So you're saying I could just make a statement and not expect the council members to respond?
Yes. Yes.
During the public comment portion, generally, Vince, this is Dave Morrison. It's just the general practice is that people will come up and make a comment as I think you have participated previously. Once again, that's the general protocol, and I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, so I could again speak at the city council meeting?
Even then, we do not do feedback back and forth. If you want to look at for answers and feedback, you need to do it, talk to the city manager, interim city manager during the working hours, or call individual council members.
You mean a citizen cannot expect to get any response from the council when you have a concern?
That's correct. It's always been that way, Vince, has been when we do the public comment deal, it's basically we listen to people versus comments back. That's correct.
I think I've had responses from the council.
So,
I mean, if I come and say, I need a stop sign removed or a stop sign put on my corner, there's nobody to talk to, huh?
there's not during the council meeting typically, it's basically, unless it's on the agenda, if it's on the agenda, that's different. Or then you talk to the individual department involved, what you need, you talk to that department head or the city manager.
So ask the city manager to put it on the agenda?
No, you cannot. Just for the response, if you ask for, if everybody received it, and if there's any changes, the city manager can give you that feedback.
So I should ask the city manager to put it on the agenda for a response? I guess I don't
You would
understand.
communicate with council, and then I poll council, and if the consensus is to put it back on the agenda, that's what would happen. But I have done that, as we discussed, and the consensus was not to put it back on the agenda.
So it's up to the city manager whether it's going to be on the agenda or not?
Correct. And he talks to the city council. If they indicate, there's enough of them indicate they want it on there, then it could potentially be on there. That's the process. So you can call each individual, if you wish, council member, to ask that question. That you can then also talk to the city manager, and he'll call the council people and ask what their wish is.
Right.
And then, if there's enough people, then it can get onto the agenda. If there's not, then it does not go on the agenda.
So I have to assume that the city manager is conveying my feelings and my thoughts and everything to the city council.
He potentially is, but you can contact the council members individually yourself.
Right, okay. Okay, which the coalition has already. And so we're waiting for a response.
And the response was that a majority of the city council wish it not to be back on the agenda.
No, but that's your saying that. I haven't heard it from the council.
Well, then you call each one of them and ask them. Okay?
Okay.
Okay? Thank you.
So this is a committee of the whole meeting, right?
Even the city council meeting's the same way.
Okay.
Okay?
So what message do you wish me to give to the National Congress and to the Native Americans membership?
Reach out to the city manager tomorrow, and he can let you know. Okay?
See, you're individually going to speak to him again? Is that what you're saying?
Potentially, or he may reach out to them, but he may or may not. That you could talk to him tomorrow, and he'll let you know if he's reached out to everybody. Okay?
And Vince, I will do that. I will contact each of the council members tonight or tomorrow morning, and then maybe we can get together tomorrow before lunch and have a discussion.
So unless a council member asks for it to be put on the agenda, it won't be put on the agenda.
A majority, at this point, a majority of them, if they ask for it, it will be put on there. Otherwise, it will not.
The majority has to ask to put it on the agenda?
Yes. Or the city manager, he builds the agenda, so he has the ability to do it on his own, or a majority of the council.
And
An individual council member can't ask for something to be put on the agenda?
Correct.
they can ask for it, and then I build consensus with
Beg
the
your pardon?
council. They can ask for it for sure, but I build consensus with the council. If the consensus of the council is to put an item on the agenda, it gets put on the agenda.
Dave, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say that an individual council member can ask for something to be put on the agenda, and then it follows the statutory process as indicated for the same as setting a special meeting. So it would not be, in my research has indicated that it takes a majority of a quorum, which would be 3 as opposed to 4 or 7. And I think that that's been conveyed previously. It's been the policy of Rock Island that they've done it with the majority. I don't know if that's a written policy, but I know that is how they have proceeded in the past. But if there is not a policy in place, it would be 3 out of 7. If there is a policy of 4 out of 7, then the policy that has been adopted would be the number that would be needed.
Okay?
Does that make sense?
It's, I guess if you say so, but I find it very difficult to understand that why on this particular issue that you have taken this kind of a position.
We've taken it out of it.
6 of you have, including the mayor, including the city manager, that it's sort of, putting up a barrier to having an open discussion and trying to understand why that Native American coalition feels so badly about this.
And so I need to now suspend what we're doing here, because this is not, what we talked about is typically we don't do the dialogue back and forth just for this reason, because we could be up here for a half hour debating back and forth, and unfortunately we are on a time limit tonight.
Right,
And
5 minutes.
so we cannot, and that's why we typically don't do the debate back and forth.
Well, that's why we sent you emails with all the information that we had.
Correct.
And supposing the the bank manager, bank president decides to decline the donation, what is your position?
We're not going to respond at this point, because we haven't talked about it as a council, so we're not going to talk about that at this point.
Okay. So our next step should be to talk to him, to talk to you.
You have the right to talk to anybody you wish,
Okay.
okay?
Well, thank you for the privilege of talking to you this evening.
Thank you. All right. If there's nobody else for public comment, I guess we'll get started in general obligation bonds. Thank you. Linda?
Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. We're here for an informational session talking about potential refunding opportunities for 2022 and also pension obligation bonds discussion. So I have 2 gentlemen here this evening. I have Anthony Maselli from Spear Financial. They provide the financial advisory service to the City of Rock Island for bond issues, and also Stephen Roberts from Baird, who provides the underwriting services for the bond issues. So I am going to get out of the way and let the experts take control here.
Thank you. I've been called an expert, made my night. So, wanted to give, I've been doing work for the city for years, decades. Actually worked with the county, airport, Moline, East Moline. So, wanted to bring this concept to you because if you've read in the local press, pension obligation bonds have been mentioned. And Anthony and I have done the work on all of those issues, so we think we're pretty experienced. So if we want to, where I'm going to start is something that's a little easier to understand than the POB concept. And when I say POB, pension obligation bonds, is a bond refunding. And what we did is look at the city's outstanding debt for opportunities. And as you can see, we have identified the 2014 A's as a possible candidate. And basically, a refunding is not dissimilar to a mortgage refi or basically saving any type, lowering your interest rate. And as you can see, we've looked at the 2014 A's, and on a gross basis, cash flow, it would save, as of rates of last week, around $116,000. Present value, dollars to you today, $100,000 or 3.3%. And the question is, what does that 3.3% represent? That is basically the savings divided by the amount of bonds you're refunding, and it gives you this percentage, and I like to call it the who cares test. So basically, there's a threshold, and usually, I think in the city's case, is above 3%, it makes sense to do. But we talked prior, this is a relatively small bond deal compared to what you usually do, around $3 million. But if you look at that last bullet, the 2014 Bs, which are a taxable bond issue. We have looked at those, and a few months ago, they did work. But as you've probably been reading in the press, interest rates have been tracking higher. So they fell, what I call, out of the money and have dis-savings, so of course we wouldn't refund them. Now, one thing that I know the city's talked with their financial advisor, Anthony, is restructuring some debt, and this could be a part of a bigger plan that I'm not privy to, so if there's any questions there, he's available to discuss. So with that, moving on to POBs, the fun conversation here. So what I'm gonna do today is really present the concept. The next question would be, is it the right time to do it, or should we do it? And that's above my pay grade. But just to give you an idea of what everyone's talking about, or people are looking at, is on this first page, gives you a good summary. The unfunded liability in the pension systems for police is 90 million, firefighters 73, or 160 million, which is a pretty big number. That is a liability. That is a debt of the city. You basically are funded at 30%, we'll aggregate it. Your rate, you're assuming this debt is accruing interest at the 7.1%. You can see, we'll get into later what the payroll growth assumption does, and you're amortizing it over 21 years. So basically, what a POB is arbitrage. You are borrowing in the taxable bond market, so let's just, for hypothetical, say you want to do 100% funding, you would borrow $160 million at a taxable bond yield, and the difference, if you think of it as a bond refunding, between the 7.1% you're accruing interest at and the taxable bond yield would create savings. And in the past, significant savings versus, that's why Moline, East Moline, the county actually looked at it too. That's why municipalities are looking at POBs. What I'll have you do is go to the next page, and we're not actuaries. And actually, this is the perfect page. But what we do, I've been doing this for 20 years, is POBs. We have a pretty good model of how your actuary would model this. And you can see the very problem here. When I talk about payroll growth assumption of 3.5%, it's like putting an interest rate on an interest rate, which creates this curve. And a lot of cities and other municipalities look at this and say, this is a problem because we're going from just north of $10 million all the way up to over 20. So we're doubling our payments over that 21 years we discussed. So this isn't sustainable. And basically, I should let you know, where are these numbers coming from? That's that very model that we've developed to model. What you would do is bring an actuary in if you decided to do it, like Moline did, and they would give you more definite numbers, but we're pretty confident, have a high degree of confidence this is close to what your curve would look like. So what are POBs? They would be issued as GO, unlimited tax GOs of the city. You would basically, and what we've seen, your home rule, you would use your pension levies to support debt service on these bonds. This, we're not talking about your normal cost. This is only the liability of the pension systems that would be, in effect, I hate using this word, but refunded or defeased. So POBs, I said above my pay grade, is it the right time to do it? POBs make a lot of sense when that taxable interest rate is significantly lower than your assumed rate of 7.1%. We were talking about before, last year, we were looking at 40% savings. If you remember how the amount of savings divided by the debt that you're refunding, in the case of your bond refunding was 3%. And now on the next page, we'll show you what it looks like. Or actually, yes, thank you. So basically, the annual payment to amortize the UAAL is basically from our model, And it starts, as I said, at 11 million in 2023 and goes to 21 million in 2041. And under that box, that blue box, is the taxable bond issue. So you can see the principal, the interest with an all-in interest rate of 4.22%, and then you can see the debt service, and the savings is in that gray box. So we can structure this in a multitude of ways, but here we did a very conservative, modified level debt service, and you can see the savings patterns. Less savings up front, which the rating agencies like to see, and then savings grows to around 8 million in 2041, all estimated, for a total savings, taxable bond issue versus how you're doing it now, is an estimated $56.5 million. Present value of $30 million, it's that gray box that's below it. The PV is $31 million, or 19%. So I'll say this is with the rise in taxable rates, this is one of the smaller savings amounts. When we did Moline and others, you could see upwards of 40%. So with the rise in taxable, savings has come down, which I would at least caution you to, because like I said, we're not recommending, we're educating in this forum, but there's definite risk associated with the POB that some clients have gotten over, but they're ones you should be aware of. Here's what we're doing is basically that upward, what I call the ski slope, has been fixed. So with the level debt service, you aren't seeing that doubling in debt service. You are actually seeing, after that little ramp up, you're seeing we are completely leveling off your payment, which is seen as a very conservative structure. Benefits. I don't like spending a lot of time on this because the benefits are manifest as you save potentially a lot of money. You're able to fix that upward sloping. You're replacing one debt obligation or liability with another. We talked about lowering the 7.1% assumed rate that you're accruing interest on that debt with a taxable bond yield of 4.22% in today's market. And I should say we were very conservative. We actually ramped up interest rates a little bit, so we're not overselling this concept, especially with how the taxable yields have gone up. And it immediately takes care of a problem that if you look through your rating report, that the rating agencies have identified it as an issue, is lower funding in the pension systems. And this, however you look at the plan you have to fund by 2040, will do that immediately, which is a positive. Risk. This is where I like to spend some time. I encourage everyone looking at this concept, especially in your case, is look at the popular press. There's a lot here that when East Moline did it, there were a lot of articles on this concept. So I encourage you to look at that and just be aware of what's out there. But the chief risk of this concept is right there in the first one. It's an arbitrage, as I said. So how you look at it is, if you earn at the assets that you're investing, let's call it $160 million, when you invest that over the life of that 21 years, if you earn less than the bond yield, the 4.22%, you shouldn't have done the transaction, you will lose money. If you earn the 7.1% that you're assuming in the pension funds, all the savings that I presented today would be realized. If you earn over the 7.1, more savings. And if you earn between the 7.1 and the taxable bond yield of 4.22%, you're going to have savings but less than I presented. That's the chief risk of a POB, because no one can stand up here and guarantee what's going to happen with your results. So what we encourage clients to do is go back and look include '08, a down year, and see what your average is over an extended period. That in no way guarantees the future, but it at least gives you an idea. And something we talked about before, consolidation adds another wrinkle to this with what they don't have results yet. So we don't know what they will earn in the consolidated funds. If you could go back just one. There's other risk associated, and I want to give you just a summary of them. I'll hit a few of the important ones. One of them is, if you look at a 401k, let's just look at an example. You can see the power of accrued interest, right? So if you start investing after college until 30, and the B scenario is someone starts at 30 and invests to retirement, that B will never catch up with A. Why is that? Because of accrued interest. So this works the risk in an opposite way, is if you take a loss right off the bat on that 160 million, it's harder to catch up to that investment line, because what you've done is shrunk your asset base, and it's harder on a smaller asset base to earn it back. So that is a risk. There's mitigation strategies that we've done with a couple clients, and it's dollar cost averaging would be an example. This risk is minimized with consolidation, because what you're doing is buying a proportionate share of a huge fund, which it's not you taking 160 million and throwing it into the stock market. I hit the first one, investing a large dollar amount at once. POB proceeds have to be turned over to the systems. They can't be kept. I've had a couple clients ask, well, can we keep the proceeds invested ourselves? No, because for you to get rid of that unfunded liability, they'll have to go into the pension funds. POBs, the last one. POBs are a hard liability while you paying your pensions is a soft. We heard this more probably a decade or more ago, where clients would say we're taking pension holidays and others. But now I would argue both are hard, because you have to be 90% funded by 2040. So it's more of a, we need to fund our pensions, and you have to pay your taxable bond issue. So both would be considered hard liabilities. What won't change? Your ongoing financial commitments. You will continue to pay normal costs. We're not talking about normal costs. Actually, if you were to do normal cost, include that, that's seen as budgetary relief by the rating agencies and usually leads to downgrades. So this is only the debt portion of that. Additional unfundeds may open up in the future. So unfundeds are basically a math thing. So we have assets, we have liabilities. What's the difference is the unfunded. Even if you did the 160, next year a new unfunded could open up. And probably will. You could be overfunded, but investment results go up and down, and so you could see a future unfunded. So this is not a fix-all. None of the plan's assets are pledged to the POBs, and consolidation, obviously, if this is an obvious one, will still happen. The last page just gives you an idea. GFOA recommends against it, and I'm in slide 17, there you go. And basically, what I'm presenting today, only one is applicable, is the invested proceeds will fail to earn more than the interest rate owed over the term of the bonds. It's an arbitrage, so that's what we talked about in that first risk. The rest of them, we are not presenting. We're not talking about swaps, derivative products. You're a home rule. You're not burdened by debt limits. Number 5, rating agencies are at best neutral on the concept, but there are strategies to get them to neutral that your financial advisor, Spear, and Baird have worked on. And that's basically to be as conservative as possible. And one of the most conservative things we can do is how we structured these bonds with level debt service. So if you, for instance, the red flag to rating agencies is if you in 4 years took all your savings up front. So they'd say, oh, this is a political cycle that you're structuring it, but if you take savings on the back end, it's seen as conservative. So this gives you an example. These are deals I've worked on, and some of these names are surprising because you can see we did City of Wheaton, which is AAA. They did a POB. Anthony and I just completed one for the Village of Skokie at $150 million, and you can see from Freeport, East Moline have done this concept, albeit at lower interest rates, because they did it last year. And here's some other POBs throughout Illinois. We worked on the Winnebago one. That was really one of the first done in the state. And we worked on Bedford Park also, which is right near Midway Airport. And then I just put it case studies. If you can't sleep at night, you can read through these. But that just gives you an example in references. So with that, I was going to pause. Did you have anything to add, Anthony? Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Anthony Maselli with Spear Financial. Stefan did a good job of summarizing the idea of POBs. I just wanted to add a few things to kind of consider and think about as you think about this concept. One that wasn't touched on is if the concept's something you believe in and want to learn more about or pursue, you do not have to fund 100% of the liability. You can fund any percentage that you wish. As an example, in the City of Moline, we funded the liability up to 85%, with the thought being that if there are legislative changes to the pension system on that remaining 15% that they are still funding, they still get to take advantage of those. So that's also a consideration. And then finally, I guess what I would, as you think about this as a concept, it's been around for a long time. It got a lot of traction in the last few years because of how low taxable interest rates have been. Most of the issues last year were done at or under 3%. And when you think about, does this concept work, you have to be comfortable with what that taxable rate's going to be, because as Stefan had mentioned a few times, this is an arbitrage play. You're going to borrow money to invest money, and you need to earn more than what you borrowed at. When you look at 20-year history of your fund, and you look at taxable bond rates, and you can borrow at 2.75%, there's a high degree of confidence that you can earn that over 20 years. As rates are now over 4%, that confidence starts to dwindle. So if this becomes something that you're interested in, the next question is going to be, where am I not interested in it? Or where does that rate become too high that the risk level is now too high for us to do something like this?
Any questions? I don't want to overstep if we can have give and take.
You got a question? Go ahead.
No, I have questions for Linda, our finance manager.
You said it was 3% a couple years ago?
Last year.
Last year, and it's up to 4.22 now.
Well, Skokie was pretty close to, that was earlier this year. We've seen a ramp up, and I did put market slides in that I know you have time constraints, you don't want to hear from me for 2 hours, but rates have spiked over the last few weeks, 40 basis points, so that's significant. So it's really, the question is what rates will do in the future. We have no idea. So like Anthony said, if you're interested in the concept and you get to a point that, I think Moline was a perfect example, like if we breached 3.25, whatever it was, they wanted us to come back and discuss whether it made sense. So you can say, you're in no way obligated to do this idea. Even if you're interested, you can say, put a parameter that we're not going to be above what Anthony mentioned, 3%. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen.
Thank you. So Linda, if you don't have the answers to these questions, that's okay. You can get back to me.
Sure.
So in our audit, which is the CAFR report, right? The last audit. So we had a total of $345 million in debt and unfunded liabilities. So $205 million of that was unfunded liabilities. So this presentation is saying we have 160 of that 205 million is pension liabilities. So I guess my first question is, what's the other $45 million in unfunded liabilities that we have? I thought it was all pension. So,
And it should be fire and police pension. It could be, as far as looking at last year and this year. So again, I'll have to get back with you on that.
sure, no,
To
that's
get that
fine.
information.
Yeah, that's
Because
fine.
we are just working through our audit, and actually I had.
Oh, that's right, yeah, it's time for
I
that.
had just printed out all the debt, because I figured, I'm like, Judith is going to ask me about the debt. But I left it on the
That's
printer.
okay. That's okay. I just
But I'll get
remember
back to you
that
with
stuck in my mind when we had
Right.
the auditors come.
Right.
So the other question that I have is regarding when we refund the bonds, or is that a refinancing of the bonds? Is that accurate too?
Refunding or restructuring.
Restructuring the bonds, okay. So I don't remember what the Series 2014A, what those were for.
214A, that's the police station.
Oh, okay. 214A is the police station. Okay. So my question, because I know since I've been around the city, we've done this restructuring several times already. So does the finance department track the rates that are presented to us when we're presented with that option, and then when we actually go to restructure the bonds or refund them, did we get more or less of the savings than what we were told? Because it takes a long time, I understand,
Right.
with that process. So I guess for me, it would be helpful if that information of, okay, here's what we told you, but then when we went to go sell, here's what they sold at, so that we could have that information. If you could provide a historical report when we've restructured bonds, only since 2017, because we've only done it a few times, right? I just would be curious to see how well we've done.
Right,
We never hear that part of the equation,
right.
so.
And like you were saying, things can change between the time, because we
Right.
start maybe
Right.
maybe in the summer, but it's
Right.
almost the end
Right.
of the year before things are finalized. It really depends on the market,
Right. Well, and the one that I specifically recall was when I was city clerk, and it was September 2019. We restructured, no, these weren't even refunding. It was the Watchtower debt, where we went to paying interest only, because we didn't have the money to pay principal and interest. That one still sticks in my mind. But I know we have restructured other things and gotten refunded where we've, gotten savings, or at least that's what we were told we were going to get savings. So I'm just curious.
Okay,
So I thank you for that information.
you're welcome.
Any other further questions at this time, or we can let them proceed?
Is there more to the presentation?
You have more? I assume there was, but maybe not.
There was not for
Okay.
POBs, there was market update.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I have some questions about POBs, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So, I was intrigued by you saying that some communities pay off the entire unfunded portion, some communities pay not entire 85% or whatever you said for Moline. As you identified, really what the squeeze is, in my opinion, is the ramp, and the fact that every year we're going to have to be raising taxes to be paying for this, and if we could just get it on a level field, even if it's continuing to go, at least it's level, that would be more doable.
Right.
For some of these communities that don't pay off all of it, do they pay off enough of it in order to level out that ramp, so then it's not continuously increasing, or would it just make more sense to pay off all of it, I guess?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because Winnebago is a great example, and Freeport's another, is that you went through the concept, and Spear did say, you can do less, but then the client said, well, you believe in the concept or you don't, so we want to do it all. But then I know Moline was part of a bigger strategy conversation, is that 15% would be fixed, so it would, Anthony can speak more to it, but I think the theory behind it is we'll worry about that ramp on the 15, but we'll fix most of it, and then we're going to come back later and clean up that other 15 even with, is that fair?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Also, the state legislators talked about taking it from 2040 to 2050 for 90% funded, so that was another factor in it.
That was a factor for the city of Moline, is leaving that 15% out, just in case the state did do that. They would have, city council would have the option to extend the amortization on that portion liability.
Sure.
Not that they need to, but that was the idea. Now, taking out 85% of that liability did significantly level that overall payment, because now you're only having that ramp up on a smaller portion of the liability. So it in a way, accomplished both of those goals for them, and 85% for them was kind of that sweet spot of where it made sense.
Yeah, I would be curious, where would our sweet spot be? How much of our debt would we have to, well, how much of our unfunded liability portion would we have to fill in order to level out that ramp? I'd be curious about that.
Yeah, and if this becomes a thing for future discussions, what you can do beyond there is we can start to show different scenarios. Here's what 50% funding looks like, 75% funding. Because the other reason for not funding the entire thing is mitigating those risks that Stefan talked about. There's a number of risks associated with this transaction, and if you're not fully on board with this as a financing concept, piecemealing your way into it can help that, if it's a way that makes you comfortable with it. But
Sure.
We can then look at what a 50% funding strategy, 75% funding strategy is, and start to figure out what payments look like in the future with only funding a portion.
Okay. I had another question for other communities that you've done this in. Has POBs been a part of a larger discussion with the bargaining units about long-term restructuring of benefits? I recall reading about this very thing, I think maybe Chicago's POBs, where they were saying, this doesn't really make sense, because as you pointed out in your presentation, okay, so we fill the unfunded liability now, but this liability continues on into the future so long as we have these pensions.
Yes, sometimes. And
Right.
Winnebago is a great example, because what the board did is said, we're authorizing this, but we don't want to be back here in 5 years doing another POB. So what structural within the Illinois constitutional kind of constriction or restrictions you have can we do? So they did, and it's part of a bigger plan. And rating agencies, by the way, like that, is okay. We see this. You have your toolbox. This is one solution, but what are you going to do going into the future to make sure unfundeds don't keep opening up? And then you see me again and talking, we could do a POB. So, yes, but then I have others that it wasn't that I know of, because I do bond, but I'm not, like I keep saying, is above my pay grade. They don't involve me in those conversations.
But you could also continue to have the unfunded mandate grow. If you're paying 4% or whatever it is, and the market that's invested in does 0,
Right.
you now have a unfunded mandate again. Even if you did 100%, when you did 100%, you could have that, or it could grow from 80% to 85% funded to 80% or whatever it is because of that. As you saw in 2008 and 9, especially, the market lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not just a 0, it was a negative. And so there are those years that it's less than 4%.
But you have to look at this is not a 2 or 3 or 4 year issue.
20-year type of deal.
You're looking at a 40, 50-year proposal, and to address a comment made by my colleague here, is the Chicago unit is in a totally different pension fund system.
Oh, yeah.
We are Article 3, Article 4 pension fund systems, which is a totally different bird.
Correct.
So, and with the consolidated fund, I've seen numbers with the rate of returns anywhere from 6% all the way up to depending on who you listen to, 7.25%. So, where we land in that mix is still to be seen.
But those are predictions. There's no guarantee of that.
No, there's absolutely no guarantee. The benefit of it is, the market as it sits right now, is if we can jump in and it's not market timing, but if you get in on a fire sale, if you will, and the market takes that giant leap, then we all look like heroes.
Market's a little low right now, too.
If it doesn't, then the city is looking at us, looking for the, some place to
Tar and feathers.
have a heart-to-heart talk with us.
Exactly. There's risk. There's definitely still risk out there.
Well, I guess what I was getting at is there an opportunity to negotiate with the bargaining units for whom these pensions are for? And this isn't really a question for you,
Yeah.
right? This is a question, not even really for Linda. This is a question for our HR buddy back there. But is this an opportunity? I'm thinking if I'm a brand-new police officer, what is the likelihood that the city is going to meet its obligations? Certainly, there's good reason to think that we will, but is there an opportunity to say, okay, as part of a restructuring of benefits here, the city will agree to do something like a pension obligation bond to ensure that for the workforce that's here now, you don't got to keep worrying about your pensions, but we're not going to get into this situation again moving forward, so we're going to have to talk about these benefits, right? Is there an opportunity for that type of discussion?
It's in the state constitution.
Yeah.
The state constitution is you cannot lower the benefits.
No, I know that, but are we suggesting that our workforce and the city cannot negotiate and agree upon a different benefit structure?
I understand they cannot. That is off the table. It is illegal to do that.
I think.
I think
what you're getting at, if I may, is the degree of pay increases, which would be the only effect that the bargaining units would have any say in. But as far as the benefits afforded them by the pension, by the code, I don't care how bad the city wants to negotiate, how bad the unions want to negotiate, the code is statutory and, cannot be, short of a constitutional convention, cannot be changed. What we can change is the amount of raise, and part of the assumption that goes into the actuarial assumptions is the mortality tables, which was mentioned here, the assumed rate of increase, whether it's, and I've seen it over the 30 or 40 years that I've been doing this, we're going to assume that the officers are going to get 5% increase per year, and we know that at least in the last 10 years, that hasn't been the case. That would be the only thing that we could negotiate with regard to benefits.
Yeah, and the state could vote, we're on either step 2 or 3. They several years ago, don't quote me, they did negotiate a step 2, at least, if not a step 2, at a lower benefits. The state did.
Tier 2.
The state
Tier 2. The state did.
The tier 2.
And they can do that, because Constitution basically says, once you start as a police officer, you're there. So then they could do a step 3, or level 3, or whatever you want to call it, and do it lower if they wish, and that any officer starting after that date would be at that situation. But that's only at the state level, because the only place that can change that direction, unless you change the Constitution.
And prior to 2005, they actually had a self-managed program for pensions.
Yeah.
And that went nowhere. So,
And I say that, and police and fire may be a little different, whatever, but that's the levels and different deals. And the other things they can change there is retirement age and benefits the spouse gets, and they can do some of those things on those steps also. But I'm pretty doggone sure that we cannot negotiate outside the states.
You're telling me, and I'm not even suggesting that I want to do this, I'm just, hypothetical situation, you're telling me that we couldn't come to an agreement where the FOP agrees to go into a separate 401K plan with the city?
when I say I'm telling you,
Really?
he's on the pension board, the state pension board.
It's bizarre that the state can dictate what the collective bargaining unit can agree to.
I want to use a four-letter word, but no kidding. I've been arguing that forever.
Well, no, I mean.
They make it's an unfunded mandate, and that's what's the frustration.
I guess you're not taking anything away from what a body agrees to. That's my point, right? If we unilaterally say, we're not doing this anymore, you can't do that. I get it. But is there opportunity to negotiate something different?
I tried
We'd have to
that
get the
a little
experts, whether it's our attorney or somebody else, experts to give you an opinion of that, but Mark is pretty darn close to that because he's on the state pension board. And
this is Dave Morrison, and I think that that's probably, if you were going to consult on that, you would want a lawyer who practices exclusively in that area, because I am sure that that is very detail-oriented and requires a lifetime of experience beyond those issues.
Okay. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Can I make a question?
Yes, Jerry, come on up. Yeah. You need to come up to the microphone, Jerry. Jerry Hughescamp, President or Chairman of the Board, Blackhawk Bank and Trust, but...
Retired now.
Yeah, okay.
I'd like to ask either Stephen or Anthony, are there limits to how this $160,000 could be invested? And be my understanding that cities can only invest a certain percentage in the stock market, and the other percentage would go to the bond market. And it'd be my comment that we have a Federal Reserve Board now that, and certainly a Secretary of Treasury of the United States that's somewhat committed to the modern monetary theory, which is trying to keep interest rates very, very low for very, very long. And so if we can only get, say, 2.5% or 2% on our bonds, even if we go out 10 years, what percentage would be eligible to go into the stock market, and does that require the stock market to earn 10% as opposed to maybe 6 or 7? And so when you combine the two, what is the advantage of, say, 2.5% bond and a 6% stock, and the percentages of each that you could have in the fund? So the question is, how much is required by the state? What percentage can be invested in the stock market or other type of investments?
I don't know if they can answer that.
Yeah, and so at closing, if you were to do the whole $160 million, it would all get invested with the pension funds and be subject to the investment restrictions that they have. I don't know off the top of my head what the percentages are, but there is a percentage, but perhaps you would have them, but there is a percentage split between the most you can have in equities, and then the rest would be in bonds.
Mark, are you able to answer that with the combined?
Now that it's going into the consolidation fund, I don't have those numbers right now. Prior to the consolidation, it was 60-40.
That's what I thought.
60% equities, 40% bonds.
Yeah.
So that, at least with the funds our size. Now, smaller funds, of course, we don't care, because they're not, we care, but it doesn't affect City of Rock Island. I'm talking City of Rock Island.
We were 60-40 before the combined.
To the point being made, though, yes, if you're currently at that 60-40 split and you borrow $160 million to invest, a portion of the money you've borrowed is going to be invested in bonds. So you're borrowing bonds to invest in bonds for a portion of this.
Borrowing at 4%, but getting 2.5% return.
If I may, Mayor,
yes.
What percentage of this, if we went into POBs, what percentage of that would be directed to the consolidated fund? Would you take would the city invest that money and then just use that money as, depending upon what the annual actuarial assumption was by the consolidated board? Or would they take the
proceeds and
the 160, let's say 160 million for both and that would be divided up into two funds because there's two consolidation funds.
Right.
So it'd be 80 million to the police fund and then 80 million to the fire fund.
You have a question? Yeah, either way, but do you have a question? If we were to sell bonds and everybody else would pay it, does it go directly to the combined deal?
Yeah, it would go to the pension fund. So you wouldn't hold on to the funds and then pay an annual payment to the pension funds with the money you've borrowed. You would deposit that with the pension fund so that your asset number would increase and therefore not get the bill for the unfunded liability each year. That said, there are strategies for dollar cost averaging the investment, where you perhaps hold on to the funds for a year and deposit, additional funds with the pension fund, each month, that sort of thing can be worked out. But ultimately, they are going to get all of the funds, and it'll be mixed with pension fund assets.
And again, I know that right now, the letters are going out, and Linda can attest to this, with the different tranches that are transferring funds over to the consolidated fund. The consolidated funds are actually putting a stop all trades date, and then from that point on, it's not dollar cost averaging. They're taking, with the exception of a 60 or 90-day level of funding, so that we can continue to pay bills. The remainder of that is transferred over to the consolidated fund, and so I don't know if that would be, I see it being disadvantageous to the city in doing that, because then the city doesn't get the benefit of the returns. And I don't know how that, I don't know how that's going to work out. Again, this is a new animal, and we're all just getting used to it. So,
Okay.
Does that help at all?
Does? Everybody all right?
Can I have one more quick question?
There's mud.
Other post-employment benefits, like retiree health care, right? Have you had any other communities pursue a POB to pay for OPEBs?
OPEB. Typically in Illinois, OPEB is, it's on the books, but it's paid for by the worker, or by the retiree, rather.
Okay.
So it's an implicit liability, not a real liability. So there hasn't been a situation that I've been aware of in Illinois where somebody's borrowed for OPEB.
I agree.
Okay. Stefan agrees.
Thank you.
There's nothing else. We do need to move on. We're going to the topic and try to get done early here. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good education. Next up, Melanie, who's going to make this presentation? Miles, you or Colleen, or somebody on the Zoom?
Attorney?
Attorney's Kathy going to be there?
Yes, we should have. And I think I see her.
I hope you can see me.
Yeah, if we can pull up the actual view so that we can see her and not the agenda, that'd be wonderful.
I comb my hair so I won't scare any of you.
Who does?
You've got 25 minutes, CAFO.
I hope not to need that much. The problems at Millennia Housing Development at Century Woods in Heather Ridge are known to all of you, so we need not go through that. The fact of the matter is there are serious problems. I work with the staff when we set up the TIFs for these projects, really believing that we would significantly change the neighborhoods and improve the properties. Despite best efforts, and there's nothing more the city could have done in terms of agreements and permitting, et cetera. In any event, despite all of that, the project was never completed. The city even gave 6 additional months for the project to be completed. And so it brought us to January 1 of 2022, and working with the staff, there was nothing else to do but to, in fact, declare a default. We sent out default letters, and curiously enough, on one of the last few days before the whole deck of cards would fall, they did contact us. And in the meantime, the staff and I had a very, very serious conversation. I want to share that with you because we were trying to absolutely determine what would be the best for the city and what could we do. Well, there's 3 things you could do. Number 1, you can do nothing and let it sit there and continue as it had for years. Number 2, you can declare a default, absolutely cut off any future funding because they have not produced at all as they had agreed, and they were in default. The third thing is the staff informed me of all of the difficulties and all of the complaints you had received, properly so, from the residents of these 2 housing developments. And so by calling a default and closing the door, I'm not sure it would in fact do what the city council deserves, i.e. making things better for their constituents, for your respective constituents. So I finally contacted the attorney for the Millennia Housing Development and had a very serious talk and said, I can't believe how foolish you are. The city did all of this. There is increment ready to be distributed to you, and you don't do what you're obligated to do under the agreement. I don't understand it. Well, there's been this and there's been that. Well, game's over. No, we think we can get it done. Game's over. We are probably going to proceed with the default. I'll be back to you by the end of next week. Shock of all facts, she did get back to me by the end of next week. And it remains a first. Since our very frank conversation, you can check with Jared. He's had contact. They've requested reissuance of the permits. They have begun to reconstruct, to continue with the redevelopment of the property. I have also had conversations with the general counsel saying, wait a minute, there were amenities that you promised the city council you would provide to the residents. Well, looking at the agreement, all they had agreed to provide is some amenities, expecting a walloping sum of $1,000 per development per year. In the meantime, though, she tells me that they have hired a new entity that will work both developments and are going to get involved in a program. I would defer to staff to confirm that construction is back on track. I'm here explaining the situation to you. I do not have a recommendation at this time. Why? Any entity that has defaulted is they have defaulted. You're not going to prove to me they can do it until it's done. I don't recommend an amendment to the redevelopment agreement. We tried that and gave them more time. I think we are better off, if there is a recommendation, is to continue to absolutely monitor this situation, absolutely stay on top of this situation, do not do an amendment to the agreement so that as soon as we believe that progress is not continuing, we can return to our default, get a new letter out, and call it a day. And remind them, as I will, that that's exactly what we are doing and shall continue to do. So I don't know if Jared is present, but he has been emailing me with constant updates that the permits were issued, sent me copies of the permits. The attorney contacted me. I don't know if she knew I was meeting with you or presenting to you, to the city council tonight or not, giving me an update as of today, affirming that the permits are there and they're working. So I would have to defer to staff because you are on site. So what I'd like to do, in the interest of time, if you agree that we should continue as we're continuing by doing nothing to end the agreement, but to work with these people to the extent they will work, and to the extent they do not, to report back to you and call it a day.
Is there any question? Anybody have any questions at this point? It's not on the agenda, and we don't have it to take an action on it, but...
So, Ms. Orr, you made the comment that they're back on track. What does that mean?
I can't say back on track. They're a year behind. What I did say is that they've gotten their permits reissued, and Jared Irvine has been on the premises and has confirmed that they are seriously working. Now, the permits run until September 2022. They're saying that they can really, if they are diligent, finish this April, May. And so time, their proof is in the pudding. They can say all they want until we are satisfied that certificates of occupancy have been issued for each of the units. And one project has 169 units, and I don't remember the number in the other. So what I am saying is they're working to the best of my knowledge. That's not on track, and that's why I do not recommend giving them an amendment to the redevelopment agreement or any more time, but just to really observe regularly what they are doing. As soon as we believe they have stopped, we will absolutely come to you and recommend we issue a letter of default, a notice of default followed by a default, and call it quits, and then start enforcing our building code.
Miles, I got a question for you. So before this point, a lot of the complaints I got is that it was just a dangerous environment to live in. I mean, they had this material spread all over the place. There was no separation of work zone and living areas for the residents that are there. How are we correcting that? Or is that our responsibility to enforce that? I would think it is. And how are we doing that? How can we make sure that they are going to do what they're supposed to be doing from our standpoint?
So like our TIF attorney is advising, it's really a question of, first of us, being there regularly to monitor what's going on. So being present to observe, right? Now that we know that they're active again on the site, and like Kathy mentioned, they've hired a new general contractor to run the job, so that's kind of what has changed here. Being there and making sure they're following standard work safety practices for the site. So, I mean, really the answer to your question is to keep on monitoring it and make sure that they adhere to those standards. Now, is there maybe a difference between what the minimum standard is and what residents would feel safe about? Perhaps. But we can only ever hold people to the minimum. And Kathy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that question as well.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm recommending, is that constant observation, absolutely stay on top of it, and take legal action only when we have reason to believe they have discontinued their progress.
So I guess my question would be to follow up Moses's, who's that person? So who is going to be there? Who is going to do it? I think in listening to Kathleen there, to put pressure on them, we need to say this, this, this. I mean, it needs to be 8 o'clock on Tuesday, as an example.
Right.
Not just, hey, next week I'll get there. I mean, it's...
So it'll be a concerted effort of the inspections division led by Jared Irving, our new building official.
Okay.
So since he's come into that role and since they've hired that new contractor, he is monitoring the situation as Kathy mentions, and like she said, sending her regular updates of what he's seeing and what's going on.
And they have to maintain our building codes.
Correct.
They have to work to our building codes.
Correct.
That difference could be there could be a difference between what our codes are and what the expectations are. There could be a difference in there. We don't know if there is or not, but there could be.
Yeah, something that's important to keep in mind is we enforce to the absolute minimum of the code, and that doesn't involve quality craftsmanship. If you're hiring someone to do a renovation of your house, obviously you can dictate the level of craftsmanship. But for our purposes, as just an inspections division, we're only able to hold them to those minimums.
Okay, so with that being said, are we confident that they're even at our building codes? I mean, at that level? Because some of the complaints I've gotten, I mean, that's a huge question.
Are you asking about units which have been completed?
Yes.
Short answer is, oh, Kathy, if you want to.
Yeah, according to, and we checked with Jared, unfortunately, the answer should be yes to that, because they were issued certificates of occupancy for those units, which meant they met code standards. So if you have a particular unit that has fallen apart, certainly, and a constituent telling you that, we got to get that report to the building department, especially while supposedly they're working with us. But any apartment that's occupied could not have been occupied without the issuance of a certificate of occupancy, which the city would have done.
What she said.
So that's the issue I have. Then what is the process to ensure that these residents are protected? Because apparently that's not the case right now. These residents are living in some substandard environment, I mean, conditions. Water just sitting in the tub, I mean, window sills that are that has gaps in it, doors that are falling out of the casing. I mean, there's a wide range of issues. So, and I think the residents are kind of lost right now because they're making complaints to HUD, which goes back to millennia, and then they start trying to, hit them with different grievances or whatever. So what, as the city, what can we do to help these residents? Who are they supposed to contact to get this stuff rectified?
The building department, they need to contact the building department. We need to get in and inspect. If these things are no longer up to code, we will get on it. We will write letters, make demands, and again, get back to, there'll be no further reimbursement. There hasn't been a nickel of reimbursement, and you'll never see a nickel of reimbursement when there are funds available through the TIF.
Okay.
I mean, they're just fools.
I guess that's what I'm looking for, just like a plan going forward. We know what we're going into, so I'm just looking at a plan from the city to kind of help with that.
Yep.
We know what we're getting into, and to kind of help the residents and give them some comfort, because right now, a lot of them are scared to say anything because they feel that they're getting threatened that they're going to get kicked out.
Sure.
I mean, I've had people say they went to try to find attorneys, and they can't get that until they actually get, eviction notice. And one resident has contacted the Chicago office, and they've called them, and then she started getting notices of, well, this is wrong, you're not doing this. So they're getting the pushback from millennia when they're actually calling and trying to do complaints. So there has to be some way we can protect them so they can call the building office and actually get this stuff fixed.
So just a point of clarification, you said they're getting pushback from millennia. Do you mean the management of the property?
Correct.
So, yeah, that's...
So they don't have invoices, they're not giving them receipts for their payment. I mean, there's a ton of things that I know we know. So that's what I mean, they're afraid to come forward because they have been told and it's been shown that they will be evicted.
So if they are living in units that are completed and those conditions have deteriorated, I think that's where, Miles, we need to provide contact information to Alderman Robinson so we can have a direct line to send our inspections over there to monitor that. And if it has fallen below that, I think she's suggesting we get back with Millennia and say these have got to be fixed.
Right.
Yeah, just remember, I'm going to have Colleen come up here and comment on a couple of these points as well, but just keep in mind, we haven't cut them any checks.
Right.
So we hold all the leverage in the arrangement here, right? And so, they have everything to gain by making sure they do things right.
Well, they're going to do what they can to get the money, is what they're going to do. I mean...
Well, the agreement is very specific. They have to provide services to the residents. And that has been a sticking point. And so when Millennia comes to us and says, we're ready for to be paid out through the TIF, our response is, you have to give us all of your receipts, all of your certified payrolls. You have to give us an agreement that shows us that you have contracted with some company that is going to provide those services that this community needs. They have to meet the threshold that they said they were going to spend for Heather Ridge and for Century Woods. So there is no guarantee that once they finish this, that they will have met the terms of the agreement. So for our purposes, we need them to finish these units. And then we still have a long road to go before we actually get to a place where we say, you have fulfilled the terms of this agreement. Our goal at this point is to make sure that these units get completed appropriately at code minimum. And I also want to point out, we are not providing certificate of occupancies. They are certificates of substantial completion, because to issue a certificate of occupancy would mean that we change the use, and we have not changed the use. All right? So that's apples and oranges, and I just want to keep everybody,
No, that's good terminology. The reality is that while we have this agreement in place, at least we have, as Miles put it, as Colleen put it, we have leverage. And we're going to use that leverage to the best of our ability. So The last response, we'll see, it's been about a month since the final default letter went out. And it is our understanding that we've got their attention. And once again, I say to you, there is no guarantee that they will do those things. But without the agreement, and if we cancel the agreement, we wouldn't have any right to address the issues that you're raising, at least while we have their attention and there's a potential for some reimbursement. We can work on the things that you're talking about or make the demands for the things you're talking about.
I'm just in fear we'll be in the situation as Davenport was in, and currently still is in. You know, their residents have to get this evicted out of the residence because theirs is that bad. That's my fear. I don't want it to get to that point. And I understand where we are, you know, it's not our property. You know, we're trying to, you know, improve it, but that's the fear, not only myself, but, you know, the people that are living in there.
I have a few comments and questions. First, who's the new GC that they've hired? Are they local? Oh, great.
I think, Kathy, you have that, don't you? I want to say it's preservation.
It's in the permit, and I didn't. I'm going to try to find it immediately.
I don't remember where they're located.
Yeah.
I want to say Bettendorf.
Okay, so they are?
Do you remember?
I thought they were
Further afield?
They have local subs.
Yeah. They're such big jobs, it's kind of hard to keep track, to be honest, of those
Yeah,
subs.
I'm looking at the permit, and the permit was issued to American Preservation Builders LLC.
That's the
It
same
does not
contractor they've
have
had.
their address.
That's the same contractor they've had from day one, American Preservation
It
Builders.
is, but they have fired and gotten rid of all of the other people. I will tell you that Jared, when he came in after he went out there, he was impressed with this new person because the guy that's out there now was put in place to get this job done and get it done right. And Jared was like, he didn't want to spend time talking to Jared because he was moving and shaking across the landscape and getting stuff done. I think that, and I might be speaking out of turn here, and if I am, forgive me, but I don't think it would be a bad thing for, Alderman Robinson to show up there and say, this is in my ward, and I just want to see what's going on.
That was my plan all along. I've just been waiting on the data to come to me, so before I make that call,
And
but
so,
that's my plan.
And Alderman Hurt, for you to go out to Heather Ridge and say, this is in my ward, and I want to see what's going on. I think any of the aldermen could avail themselves.
I have a couple questions regarding that. Dylan, did you have another one first? I know you were in the middle of...
But
Yeah,
I want to finish answering
Finish
your
yours.
question,
Yeah.
because I know for a fact that our contractors, our local contractors are on the job. Crawford is on the job, Tri-City Electric is on the job, so, and these are some of our, always go-tos, and they're great contractors. So I know that they're on the job and they're working.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a Crawford sign out front of, why am I blanking? Century Woods from day one, right? I mean, they've always subbed to local contractors, but if the prime contractor is not telling them, hey, go out there this week, it doesn't matter if the subcontractors are local. Frankly, that doesn't, not anything to you, but to the developer, I'm not particularly impressed that they rehired new staff. I guess two things that I would contribute to the conversation. It sounds to me like what Alderman Robinson is describing that the residents need is outside of the scope of what our Community and Economic Development Department does, frankly. I mean, we are limited, legally speaking, to this redevelopment agreement and the TIF agreement. What you're kind of describing is more so the scope of like what the Attorney General's office does, what Community Alliance of Tenants and other sort of renter centers around the country do, where they provide more nuanced legal assistance to tenants that are involved in a dispute with their landlord. It would be my recommendation for us to consider creating something like that. I mean, I know that's a whole another ball of wax, but this is not the only rental property in the city of Rock Island that has these issues and some sort of institutional support for renters.
Prairie State Legal Services is there to help them, and they get money from HUD to do this specifically.
Sure.
And so, I mean, I've been in contact with Prairie State Legal Services many times to guide renters in that direction.
Right.
One thing that we do have within our arsenal in CED is we have our rental property inspection, you know, and technically, we could send somebody, our inspector in there, to do an initial walkthrough. We could do that tomorrow. You know, so we do have one or two things at our, you know, that we could do.
We certainly do.
You know.
Well, might I also interject that the agreement goes further than the rehabilitation. The agreement provides that it shall be constructed and maintained throughout the term of this agreement in accordance with all applicable city codes, ordinance, laws of the state of Illinois. That they agree to pay all fees, charges, etc. They have agreed to organize quarterly meetings with the residents. So there are many, many items that we are trying to enforce at this juncture. And as I can say, proof is in the pudding. We don't know. We're working with them. To walk away and not have any leverage wouldn't help the residents at all. So that is why we're suggesting that we keep working at it, because we have had some attention the last 3 weeks, Colleen, or even less, 3 weeks.
Well, I guess my point is that the only real lever that we have is not paying them, which we haven't done already.
Right,
However, every single tenant in this building is still paying rent every month.
that's correct.
And tenant associations, tenant unions, tenant centers, Community Alliance of Tenants, so whatever you want to call these organizations, it's my understanding that the state of Illinois allows tenants to withhold paying rent in lieu of fixing their property, right? Now, I don't know about the capacity.
If it's done in a certain way.
Sure.
You know,
and
they
that's
have
fine.
to photograph, they have to put the rent money in an escrow account.
And that's what a tenant union can facilitate and assist tenants from doing. And what I'm saying is I think that's outside of the scope of what
We do,
you do.
that's correct.
And my point is, the only lever that the city has is not paying them the money. They frankly don't appear to care about that. I mean, sure, within the last 3 weeks, they say, we care about that. But perhaps they would care if all of their tenants stopped paying monthly rent, right? And so there are tools outside of the scope of what the city is doing. I think the city can play a role in trying to develop those institutions either as an auxiliary of the city or independent. Right now, the QC Housing Council is in conversations about creating a community alliance of tenants to do this very work. How can we support that? The last thing I would say is that perhaps we should consider renegotiating with the developer and talking about a community benefits agreement, right? That developers would agree to, saying, okay, we agree to certain rights of the tenants. We agree to grievance procedures. We agree to go to arbitration with our tenants if there's an issue brought up, so that there's an actual mechanism for the tenants to have to address their grievances, right? I mean, I think we have options here to pursue
Kathy?
outside of.
Thoughts?
My thoughts about that, there's no way they'd come back to the table. They've got an agreement. We either declare it a default and start all over, or we try to get the best we can out of it. I also believe Section Woods right now is generating $200,000 a year as incremental, not online, it's $220,000, they get 90%. The problem that we're having with this development group is all they care about is money. They don't care about the tenants. I think the point has been made to you backwards and forwards in 6 ways to heaven. So the reality is, the only thing we can get them to nudge them is the money. I do think that if they have substantial building code violations, and we have those violations, and we pursue to enforce them, we could also force them to lose their HUD financing. And as I go through all these things, my bottom line is that when you get to the bottom, to the end of the road, if I've not helped the residents, what am I doing? And to think that they would renegotiate a redevelopment agreement to give them more obligations, I don't think is being realistic.
Gotta watch the time.
Well, I would entertain a more private and more nuanced conversation about what our options are, because I'm all for doing more.
A couple quick questions. And so when it comes to the general contractor and the rehire of the previous group, whoever it's led by, does the city have any input on who the general contractor is?
We do not.
Zero. Okay. Just so I understand better. The only other thing I would ask is, I personally wished I would have known all this was going on prior to tonight, and I would ask that, I didn't realize we were having all these issues out there.
So we did submit an internal memo to the council members maybe 2 months ago. I don't recall exactly when, so.
I guess I'm pertaining to this because it doesn't share that on here, so we didn't really know what was coming up on tonight's particular, there's no like click open thing for this
Right.
particular presentation. I guess because if it was a couple months ago and this has progressed to whatever extent it is,
Right, so
I would
the-
only ask that maybe let the council, the alderpersons in that particular area, like kind of, I guess maybe keep us a little bit more informed on it as opposed to a blanket. Well, everybody should know, I mean, if this has been 2 months ago, I think and if it's serious, I was kind of hoping that maybe we'd get a little bit more updated information as it goes.
Well, at the end of that internal memo, we basically said that we are submitting these letters of default to them, and if we hear back, we'll come back to you. So this is us coming back to you like we
No, it
told
is.
you.
It's a ways away. I guess a lot of things get kind of lost in the shuffle of business. So I think on something this important, I guess I would hope that we would be kept a little bit more updated on this. And if you could forward some contact information so that, I think for particularly Alderperson Robbins and myself, since these ones are, we could make some contacts or go take a look at it, so that we know who we're talking to.
Are you talking about contact information for Millennia?
Correct. So like if we want to go out and take a look at stuff ourselves, I mean, like, I'm sure he drives by his areas and so do I. And so that way if we have a question, or maybe we wanted to let them know that we are kind of staying on top of it, so.
Okay, sure, we can get you that contact info.
Okay, thank you.
And I guess real quick, guys, I'd really like to thank you guys for your work on this. The city has done their part in this. Millennia has screwed this thing up royally, and we're giving them a chance to make it right for our residents who live out there, which is most important, so I appreciate it.
And I think we just in the CED department like to thank our TIF attorney, Kathy Fieldor, for all of her hard work on this, since she's kind of the person we've set loose on them. But as you can see, kind of from her comments and everything, this is a complicated matter with a lot of moving parts. And to the points about who's responsible for addressing what aspects of the problem, it's something that we talk about. We tend to have sort of blunter tools, and there are there are finer instruments that we might find with partners, so.
Thank you very much. Need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call.
Alderperson Poulos.
Aye.
Healy. Robinson.
Aye.
Hertz.
Yes.
Gilbert.
Aye.
Swanson. Aye.